Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Sped Talks with me, your host Donna Steele. This is our 11th episode in season 1, and next week I will bring the last episode, which will close out our first season, and hopefully I'll resume before the start of the new school year, somewhere there about in August, September. But I will still be open for questions, comments. The DMs will still be open. So if you do, in fact, have questions, concerns, or just want to suggest topics for next season, season 2, feel free to reach out to me and I'll respond or consider your request. But without further ado, today we're going to look at debunking 10 myths that are often associated with special education and special education students. So let's get into the episode. Debunking 10 special education myths. The first myth: children who get special education services have to be in a special or a separate classroom. That's a big myth. Because people, especially parents, when their children first get diagnosed with a disability, that's usually their first concern, what's their placement going to be like? No, the fact is, the IDA, the US special education law, says that children who get special education should be in the same classroom as other children as much as possible. This concept is called the least restrictive environment. So in other words, you don't want to restrict them to what you don't want to have them in an environment that is restrictive, rather, or LRE for short. Research shows that 2/3 of children with learning disabilities spend at least 80% of their day in the general education classroom with all the other children. Now, even though this is a myth, the child's diagnosis and severity in terms of their disability, that will dictate what their environment be. Some students might need a more restrictive environment, while a student who is somewhat self-sufficient in terms of having those strategies in place that they can navigate the general education space may need a lesser or a more least restrictive environment. But according to IDEA, the ideal would be to have them in the least restrictive environment as much as possible, where they can have that relationship with their general education peers. Myth 2: special education is only for children with severe physical and intellectual disabilities. For a long time, especially in the Jamaican setting, this is when we talked about special education, we talk about those physical and intellectual disabilities, the one that you can actually, when you look at the child, you see that something might be a little bit off. But that is a big myth, as most children who have special education services don't have severe disabilities. In fact, you can't even tell, because a lot of them have what we call hidden disabilities that you would have no idea unless you work with them or unless you're a parent. The majority of these students have specific learning disability, which, if you ask me, a lot of us go undiagnosed with a specific learning disability. A lot of us people who are just navigating the world have a specific learning disability, just went undiagnosed. That includes children with reading challenges, which we see often, even in the general education space, and not necessarily just the special education space. We see children with reading challenges often. Challenges like dyslexia, and those with math challenges like dyscalculia. Myth 3: children who receive special education will be labeled forever. I don't necessarily think that the label is dependent on people who don't necessarily have the knowledge, and so they ascribe a label to the child. But this is a big myth if you understand the disability and if you understand that the child or any individual is struggling with something. So the fact is, it's natural to worry about the stigma of a label, but special education focuses on services and supports based on a child's need, not a label. So we don't focus on a child to say, oh, this child has autism and this child has Down syndrome, and we use that to determine their placement. No, because regardless of the disability, each child is unique and their support and their services will differ based on the uniqueness of said child. When you work with teachers, it helps them understand who your child is beyond test scores and evaluations. Your input helps the school provide the best services. And keep in mind that getting the best help now doesn't mean children will have special education services forever. So bear that in mind. Myth 4, children who get special education have to take medication. This is a big myth, especially where I'm working now. People seem to think that, that's a quick fix and they're not going to get better unless they take this medication, which in some cases they might need it. But the fact is, taking medication is an individual decision you make with the help of a doctor. In fact, IDEA, the federal law covering special education, specifically states that schools can't require a child to take medication to get services. It's an individual, it's a family decision. School has nothing. School cannot say you have to take this medication before you can get your service. And I feel like a lot of it, because we want a quick fix, sometimes we do resort to the medication, but it's a myth that they have to take medication. And yes, some children may require to take medication depending on the severity of their disability and other things that they might have going on. But again, I want to underscore the point that in the US scenario, this is a parent or a family decision. The school has no bearing on such a decision. Myth 5. Children who get special education can't participate in the same activities as other children. This is a big myth. This is a big myth, although a lot of our counterparts are people who we interact with on a daily basis. They really believe this. They really believe that children should be segregated and discriminated against based on the fact that they have a disability or they don't. Even educators believe this and they hold it dear in their belief as it relates to this. Children who get special education services, the fact is, children who get special education services can join the same activities as other children, both in and outside of school. Why? Because the law says so. But even if the law didn't say that, as humans, I would like to think that we empathize and think of what is fair and would know that if a child who doesn't have a disability is capable of doing a particular activity and somebody else whose child has a disability wants to join the same activity, why would you not want that? Like we have a lot of discrimination in this world, like from just a human standpoint, regardless of what the law says. I would like to think that everybody would kind of have that mindset, but that would be in the ideal world. It's true that some children with learning and thinking difference have a hard time with social situations. Yes, we're aware of that. By nature, by virtue of their disability, some children cannot handle that. But it doesn't mean children can't participate in extracurricular activities. It's a great way to make friends and develop skills outside of a classroom setting. And I've had students who came to me with no social skills at all. And now you would never know because we have created an environment where they feel loved and they feel safe and there's no segregation. So they're playing with just neurotypical kids. And that also helps them to come out of their shells. And now they're able to navigate that social space a little bit more. They're talking more, they're engaging more. You don't have to necessarily force them to play. So there's reciprocal play now. So big time myth. All right, myth number 6. Children with special education services don't get a good education. This is similar to any education from my standpoint. It has nothing to do with special education. The fact is, special education has changed a lot over the years. The changes have helped to make sure students get FAPE. And what this is, it's a free and appropriate public education, and that they are not separated from their peers without justification. So parents now play a bigger role in the process. There's more research and awareness of learning and thinking differences, and personalized learning, assistive technology, and other approaches have changed how children are taught. So special education, the fact that they're in special education doesn't mean the service won't good and they won't get good education. A lot of that is dependent on the individuals who make up your child's team. It has nothing to do with the fact that it's special education, hence can't be good education. Myth number 7. If you've never had special education, you won't know how to support a child who does. And this is a big one. I say this because parents on the onset of learning that their child is eligible for special education, they usually go into panic mode and think that I will not know how to even care for this child, having gotten this diagnosis. But to be honest, some of these parents make the best caregiver, coming into it not having any knowledge, and then learn how to support their child. So the fact is, if you don't have first-hand experience with special education, of course, it's natural that you're going to worry and won't be able to relate. However, having good relationships with teachers can help you get ideas on how to support your child. Talking openly with children is key as well. So that's a myth, and I think it's just a mindset that we not knowing what it involves. It's an understandable myth. Not knowing what it involves, you tend to have anxiety about the situation and become fearful that you won't be able to do what you need to do to ensure that this child reaches his or her potential. Myth number 7. Children in special education cannot learn and excel. And let me just point out that these myths are not in any particular order. They are not ranked. But I feel like this is a big one for me, because parents, not necessarily parents, just people on a whole, even educators, they feel like once they hear special education, they label the children, and as such, all they can see is a label. All they're seeing is the disability and not necessarily the ability, the capability rather, of what the children can bring to the table. So the fact is, they're not defined by their disability. Like anyone else, they are capable of doing well with, that's a mistake, with the appropriate accommodations and strategies in place. Special education is all about accommodations and strategies that are uniquely designed to fit the individual needs of students. And if students get that, that should not stop them from learning and excel. Myth number 9, and this kind of piggyback on the one that myth number 8 that we just discussed. Children in special education are not intelligent. Wop, 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 right? when we think about intelligence, intelligence is a social construct, depending on who you ask what it means to be intelligent. So when we often think about intelligent, we often link it with IQ score. And if we're going based on IQ score, then yes, some students' learning capacity is is not like others. Hence, they will have a lower IQ score. Some will have a higher IQ score. If we're looking at IQ test and intelligence, linking intelligence to IQ score. For me, I don't necessarily, as a professional, I should, yes, but as just a person who interacts with people on a daily basis, I form my opinion of you being intelligent based on a lot of other things, you know, because it's almost like going to college doesn't make you intelligent. However, intelligence can also be considered in relation to a specific area, as proposed by one Howard Gardner. This is the gentleman that came up with the multiple intelligence approach. For him, he suggests there are several intelligence, and his theory talks about, things like spatial, visual intelligence, music intelligence, artistic intelligence. And I want to feel like all of us have some level of intelligence, but it's specific to a given area. So, and I have here, hence children with special needs might be intelligent in other areas, including an intellectual capacity. Many students' disability does not affect their ability to reason or express themselves effectively. For example, students who have a learning disability, students with learning disability are of average intelligence, and some of them are, above, if using an IQ scale, are score very high on an IQ test, which would suggest that they're very intelligent. So your disability does not necessarily dictate your intelligence. And again, it's also very subjective based on your idea of what you consider intelligence to be. But I like to see all my students in a way where they all can bring something to the table. Hence, they have different strengths in different areas. And I look at that as an intelligence. For example, a student who's autistic and very artistic, that's that student's intelligence. And because I can't do that, I can't even understand, how you would come up with the colors, how you're able to do this, like, in your sleep. That's that person's strength. And as such, I want to agree with Howard Gardner that there are multiple intelligence. And that brings us to myth number 10. Children in special education will always be in special education. This is a big one. When students are found eligible, this is the first thing this is one of the first things that parents want to know. How long is he going to stay in here? Is this a lifetime? And the fact is, special education is like a revolving door. It's a continuum of services. It continues. Students can learn strategies that they will need to do well outside of special education. And in the general education setting, students can work their way through the continuum based on the disability and severity, as well as they can graduate out of special education. It all depends on where you fall on the continuum. Now, does that mean the disability will go away? No, I'm not saying that. But students can transition into the general education setting, having learned strategies, having learned having been exposed to accommodation that they can utilize independently and know how to survive outside of receiving those special education services and support. So we've had very good stories where students start in the middle of the continuum and then eventually work all the way down to to the start of the continuum, which is the least restrictive environment. So they'll move from a more restrictive to a least restrictive, and with continued progress, some have even graduated. Now, again, it depends on the disability and the severity. Some have severe and profound disability where they're at the end of the continuum, and the nature of the disability will not necessarily allow them to come out of special education, because sometimes this nature and the characteristics associated with the disability makes it difficult to move all the way down the continuum. Now you will have improvement, with these students, but to be honest, not all the time they will make their way all the way completely out of special education. The nature of their disability suggests that they will always need services, always need support and accommodation, but majority of students find their way out, graduate, and are living lives ordinarily. So it is very possible. And that concludes our 10 myths, our most 10 common myths, not ranked or anything. And I want to give credit to understood.org, where I visited this website so to kind of get some information to help me in doing my research to put this presentation together. I also want to thank some of my colleagues whose brain I picked while putting the presentation together.
So there you have it, debunking 10 special education myths. If you have questions, again, comments, concerns relating to this topic or any other topic, feel free to message me, DM in the comment box, and I'll sure to get back to you. Until next time, this is Donna Steele signing out. Thank you.